My father told me not to come to the Christmas dinner because my younger brother was bringing his successful fiancée. 3 months later, he applied to be a project manager, but didn't know I was the CEO. HR introduced me during the interview. He froze. He didn't get the job. Then my parents came to my place, demanding I hire him, but I called 911. I called my dad around mid-November, just to check in about Christmas plans. My name is Marcus Russo. I'm 32 years old and I live in Denver, Colorado. I'm an architect, and, well, I'm good at what I do. But my family has never really cared about that. The phone rang twice before Dad picked up. He didn't even say hello. Just jumped right in. "Marcus, I wanted to talk to you about Christmas," he said in that blunt, clipped way he always did when he was about to drop a bomb. "Yeah, I was just calling to confirm plans," I said, already feeling that twinge of dread in my chest. "I thought I'd drive down on the 23rd? There was a pause. "That's not going to work this year." I tried to keep my voice even. "Not going to work? Why?" Dad let out a sigh, like I was some clueless kid who couldn't take a hint. "Julian's bringing his fiancée home, and, well, your presence would only bring shame." Shame. That word just sat there between us. My pulse quickened, my mind racing. Bring shame? What are you talking about? "It's not personal, Marcus. But she's a lawyer, and they're starting their life together. We need everything to look put together. Your lifestyle, your choices, it wouldn't look right." My choices. My lifestyle. Like I was some kind of stain on the family name. I swallowed hard. "You're telling me not to come to Christmas?" Dad didn't even hesitate. "Yes. It's better if you don't." I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. "Okay. Got it." He hung up without another word. I just sat there in my apartment, phone still in my hand, staring out at the city skyline. The words echoed in my head like a mantra I never wanted. Your presence would only bring shame. I wanted to scream, to call him back and demand he explain himself. But what was the point? This wasn't new. It was just clearer than ever. I walked around my apartment in circles, like I could outrun the hurt. I thought about all the ways I'd tried to be enough for them, graduating with honors, winning awards for my designs, building my own architectural firm from the ground up. But to them, none of it mattered. That night, I logged into the bank app and canceled the monthly transfer I'd been sending them for years. The money I'd been giving them to help out had always been met with silence, never thanks. And now I realized it was never really about helping, it was about control. About keeping me in my place. I didn't even tell them I stopped. I just did it. In that moment, something in me shifted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was done. I went to bed that night, alone in the quiet of my apartment, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I owed them anything. A couple days after that phone call, I couldn't shake the memories that kept bubbling up. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see my dad's face when he said I'd bring shame to the family, and it opened a floodgate of old memories I tried to bury. I was always compared to Julian. He was the golden boy, the sports star in high school, the one who went to law school and married a girl from a good family. My parents never missed a chance to brag about him. When Julian won his first big case, they threw him a dinner party. Dad even had a plaque made, "Our son the lawyer." It hung in the hallway for years, polished and gleaming, like a shrine. Me? I was the daydreamer. That's what they always called me. The one who drew too much, who couldn't focus on what really mattered. Even when I graduated top of my class in architecture school, Mom just said, "That's nice, Marcus," like I'd told her I'd picked up a new hobby. I remember when Julian bought them a new sofa for their living room. They took a photo of it, put it on Facebook with a caption about how proud they were. "Julian has always been such a good son," they wrote. No one even knew that I'd been sending them money every month for years. I thought about the bank transfers, over $40,000 in total. Rent, groceries, medical bills when Dad had his hip replaced. They never said thank you. Not once. I kept telling myself it was for them, that it didn't matter if they didn't notice. That's what family did. You helped, even if no one saw it. But now, looking back, it felt like I'd been paying rent on a house I didn't even live in. I thought about the first time I realized how deep the difference ran. I was 14. I'd won a design contest at school, built a model of a new city center that impressed the judges so much they put it in the local paper. Mom said it was cute. Julian had scored 3 touchdowns in the same week. They took him out for steak to celebrate. I remember the way Dad used to say, "Your brother just knows how to make things happen." And every time he said it, I'd hear the part he didn't say out loud, "Not like you." Standing in my living room, I looked around at everything I'd built. My firm, my own company, with 150 employees, a team that looked to me for direction. In my world, I was respected. In their world, I was a daydreamer. I realized then that I had been trying to prove something to people who never wanted to see me in the first place. They only wanted Julian, the safe one, the one who fit. That night, I took a long walk around the city. The streets were bright with holiday lights, couples holding hands, families taking photos in front of the big Christmas tree downtown. I felt invisible, and yet somehow, for the first time, I was okay with that. I went home and sat at my kitchen table, going through my old bank statements. Each transfer felt like a piece of myself I'd given away. I thought about all the times I'd said yes when I should have said no. All the ways I'd made myself small to make them comfortable. I decided then, no more. No more money. No more trying to buy their love. If I was always going to be a disappointment, I might as well disappoint them on my own terms. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Christmas morning came, and for the first time in my life, I had no place to be. No family gathering, no long drive down to my parents' house, no forced conversations over turkey and mashed potatoes. Just me. I thought I'd feel lonely, maybe even a little bitter. But when I woke up that morning, all I felt was a strange, heavy quiet, like the weight of everyone else's expectations had finally lifted off my shoulders. I got dressed and headed out before the sun was fully up, deciding on a whim to volunteer at a local soup kitchen downtown. I'd always thought about doing it, but never found the time. Maybe I'd been too busy trying to win over people who never wanted me there. The soup kitchen was warm and bustling. Smells of coffee and cinnamon rolls filled the air, and there was a hum of voices and laughter that felt like home, even though I didn't know a single person there. I spent the morning ladling out oatmeal and handing out slices of bread. People came in with worn coats and tired eyes, but they smiled, thanked me like I was giving them something more than just a meal. A retired veteran named Pete sat down across from me during a short break. He had deep lines around his eyes and a gentle way of speaking. "You made today feel normal again," he said, his voice low but steady. I nodded, not sure what to say. But those words stuck with me. Normal again. It was more than my family had ever made me feel. By the time lunch was done and the last of the pies were served, I felt peaceful, like I'd finally stepped out of a role I'd been stuck in for far too long. On my way home, I pulled up my phone just to check in on the world. That's when I saw it, a cousin's Instagram post. A photo of my family gathered around the Christmas tree, Julian and his fiancée front and center, everyone grinning like it was the happiest day of their lives. I stared at it for a second. There they were, celebrating the holiday without me, like I'd never even existed. A year ago, that would have sent me spiraling. I would have wondered what I did wrong, why I was always the one left out. But now I just felt clarity. Like everything I needed to know had already been answered. I put my phone back in my pocket and walked the rest of the way home in the cold Denver air. My fingers were stiff, my breath visible in the fading light, but my chest felt warm for the first time in years. When I got back to my apartment, I made myself a simple dinner, a bowl of pasta, a glass of wine. I lit a candle and sat there, watching the flicker of the flame. And I thought, maybe this is what it means to start over. Not in some dramatic way, but in a quiet decision to stop letting other people define what I was worth. I didn't owe them anything. I didn't owe anyone a place in my life if all they saw was someone to control, someone to shame. I had given so much of myself trying to be the good son, the good brother. And in the end, none of it was ever enough. So this time, I chose me. And it felt like the best Christmas gift I could have ever given myself. A week after Christmas, the quiet didn't last. It was like they had all coordinated it. The texts, the voicemails, the missed calls. My phone lit up nonstop with one message after another. My father started with his usual brusque tone. "Marcus, we noticed the money didn't come through this month. You need to fix this immediately." No greeting, no question about how I was doing. Then my mother chimed in. "Marcus, the mortgage is due. Can you send the usual amount?" Her words sounded polite, almost sweet, but I could hear the edge beneath them, the expectation that I'd come through like I always did. Julian didn't even bother with a real message. Just a text that said, "Mom and Dad are panicking. What's going on?" Not one of them asked if I was okay. Not one of them asked about my Christmas or how I was feeling after being told I wasn't welcome. I read the messages in the cold light of my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd canceled the transfer. It was all so familiar, the endless cycle of demands disguised as family needs. I felt a flicker of anger, but more than that, I felt free. I typed out a reply to my parents. I canceled the transfer. I didn't explain. I didn't justify it. I didn't feel like I owed them that. My thumb hovered over the send button for a moment before I pressed it, and once it was gone, I felt lighter. The next wave came quickly, phone calls, one after another. My dad's number popped up first, then my mom's, then my dad again. I let them go to voicemail, the silence on my end a final answer. A part of me wanted to pick up, to finally tell them how hurt I was, how tired I was of being their safety net while they treated me like a burden. But another part of me, the part that had spent Christmas handing out soup to strangers who saw me as a human being, knew that there was nothing left to say. I sat at my dining table, my phone buzzing every few seconds, and watched the snow fall outside my window. Denver was quiet that night, the streets covered in a soft, fresh layer of white. It felt like a new beginning. The last voicemail I listened to was from my mother. Her voice was tight, almost trembling. "Marcus, please. We don't know what to do without that money. You've always been so good about helping. Please don't do this to us. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then deleted the message without replying. For the first time, I wasn't the one scrambling to keep the peace. I wasn't the one stretching myself thin to fix problems I didn't cause. And in that quiet, I realized I liked the way it felt. A few days later, Aunt Lisa called. I hadn't spoken to her much in the past few years, but she'd always been the family peacekeeper, the one who played both sides and pretended everything was fine. "Marcus," she said as soon as I picked up, her voice soft and a little too careful. "I just heard about what's going on. I think we need to talk." I sighed. "What did they tell you?" She paused. "That you're refusing to help. That you're abandoning your parents when they need you most." I could almost see her shaking her head in disappointment. "Marcus, this isn't like you. You've always been the good son. I don't know why you're letting jealousy over Julian's fiancée get in the way of helping your family." I felt my jaw clench. "Jealousy," I said, my voice low and steady. "Aunt Lisa, do you really think this is about me being jealous of Julian?" She hesitated, but she didn't back down. "That's what your father said. He said you've always been a little sensitive about how successful Julian is." For a moment, I just sat there in the quiet of my living room, my phone warm in my hand. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to prove myself, all the money I'd sent, all the times I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. I took a deep breath. "Aunt Lisa," I said, "I'm coming over. I'm going to show you something." She didn't argue. She just said, "Okay," and hung up. I drove over to her house, a little bungalow in Lakewood that smelled like old coffee and fresh-baked bread. She met me at the door, her face pinched with worry. "Marcus," she started, but I cut her off. "Let me show you," I said, pulling out my phone. I sat at her kitchen table and pulled up the texts from Dad. The ones that said I'd bring shame to the family. The ones that told me not to come home for Christmas. I showed her the bank statements, every transfer I'd made for the past 3 years, over $40,000, all of it to keep my parents afloat. Aunt Lisa's eyes widened as she scrolled through the messages. Her lips pressed together, and I saw her shoulders slump as the reality sank in. "I never wanted to make a scene," I said quietly. "I just wanted them to see me for who I am. Not as a wallet. Not as a disappointment. Just as their son." Aunt Lisa set my phone down, her eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." I nodded, feeling something break loose in my chest. "I'm not giving them another cent. And I'm not going to pretend like this is my fault anymore." She sat there for a moment, then picked up her phone and took pictures of the bank statements and the texts. "I'm going to send this to the rest of the family," she said, her voice trembling. "They need to know the truth." For the first time in years, I saw the cracks in the perfect picture my parents had painted. Aunt Lisa looked at me with something like pride in her eyes, and for once, I felt like maybe I wasn't alone in this. When I left her house, the sun was setting over the snow-covered rooftops. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but I felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight that was never really mine. I didn't know what would come next, how my family would react, what they'd say when they saw the truth. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. Not to the guilt, not to the endless cycle of giving and giving until there was nothing left. I drove home in the quiet twilight, the sky streaked with gold and pink, and for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was starting to find my way out. 3 months later, things had calmed down. Or maybe it was just that I had learned to stop expecting anything from my family. I was back at work, back in the steady rhythm of running my firm, Russo and Partners, the small boutique architectural firm that had somehow grown into a team of 150 people. It was a Monday morning, and I was going through a stack of resumes for a new regional project manager. The Santa Fe project was about to kick off, and we needed someone who could handle the pace and the pressure. I'd been at it for a couple hours when I saw a name that made my chest go tight, Julian Russo. For a second, I just stared at it. My brother's name. The same brother who'd always been Dad's favorite. The same brother who looked at me like I was a child playing at being an architect. I flipped through his resume. He'd padded it with all kinds of nonsense, leadership roles in his college fraternity, volunteer work at a legal aid clinic, management experience that I knew for a fact was just him shadowing his boss for a few weeks. He didn't even mention how he'd gotten fired from his last job for missing deadlines. I sat back in my chair, the paper still in my hand. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and toss it in the trash. Instead, I handed it to my HR director, Sandra. "Set up an interview," I said calmly. "I'd like to be part of it." 2 days later, Julian walked into the office. He was dressed sharp, like he always was, in a navy suit and a silk tie. He looked around the lobby like he was trying to figure out how it all worked, like he thought he'd walked into a meeting he wasn't sure he belonged in. He didn't recognize me at first when he walked into the interview room. I was sitting with 2 other team leads, our new HR director, and an assistant. Julian walked in, shoulders squared, That same confident smile he used to wear whenever he'd get praised at family dinners. It took a second before he did a double take. "Marcus," he said, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Welcome to Russo and Partners." He hesitated for a second, then pasted on a smile. "I didn't know you worked here." "I don't," I said, folding my hands on the table. "I own it." He blinked. I watched his mind catch up with his mouth, watched the cracks appear in his practiced smile. We started the interview like any other, polite questions about his experience, his ideas for the project. But it didn't take long before it was clear Julian was out of his depth. He talked in circles, using buzzwords like synergy and growth strategy, without actually saying anything. When asked about managing a budget, he fumbled and said, "I'm sure I'd figure it out with some guidance." When pressed on leadership style, he said, "I think I'm good at motivating people," but he couldn't give a single example. I sat there, listening, my face calm, but inside I was seeing it all clearly. The way he'd been propped up for years, the way he'd been told he was better than me because he looked the part. But here, in my world, he was just another guy who couldn't keep up. At the end of the interview, I thanked him for his time. He shook my hand, his smile tight, his eyes darting around the room like he was hoping this was all just a bad dream. When he left, the room went quiet. One of the team leads, Sarah, looked at me and said softly, "He's not a fit, Marcus." I nodded. "No," I said quietly. "He's not." That night, I sat in my office long after everyone else had gone home. I thought about Julian's face when he realized who I really was. I thought about the years of feeling like I was always going to be in his shadow, like I was always going to be the brother who never quite measured up. And I thought about how, for the first time, I didn't feel that anymore. I wasn't just playing at being someone who mattered. I was someone who mattered. And I didn't need my family to tell me that. The morning after Julian's interview, I sat down with my team leads and HR director to talk it over. We didn't need a long meeting. Everyone knew the answer. "He's just not qualified," Sarah said gently, though I could tell she was still surprised by how poorly Julian had performed. "We can't bring someone on just because he's family." "I agree," Sandra added, flipping through her notes. "We need someone who can hit the ground running, and he's nowhere near ready." I took a slow breath and nodded. "Then let's send the rejection letter today," I said. My voice was calm, even. No waver, no second guessing. Just a final decision. The HR director drafted the email right away. "Thank you for your interest. But after careful review, we have decided to move forward with other candidates." Polite, firm, and direct. Everything I wished I'd learned to say to my family years ago. When she hit send, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second. It wasn't about punishing Julian. It was about finally drawing the line. About showing myself that I could stand my ground. That evening, the fallout began. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts from my parents, from Julian, even from my mother's cousin in Ohio who somehow thought she should weigh in. "Mom, Marcus, how could you do this to your brother? He was counting on you." "Dad, this isn't just business, it's family. You're being cruel." "Julian, I thought you'd at least have my back." I guess I was wrong. I stared at each message as it came in, one after another. Not a single one asked how I was, or how I felt, or why I made the decision I did. It was all about them, about what they thought they deserved from me. I deleted every message as soon as it popped up. Then I went into my contacts and blocked their numbers, one by one. It felt cold, but it felt right. Then I sent a single, final text to the family group chat. "Hiring decisions are based on qualifications, not family ties. Please don't contact me about this again." I hit send and put the phone face down on the coffee table. For a second, I just sat there in the silence of my apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I felt it. Relief. Like a weight had been lifted that I didn't even know I'd been carrying. I knew they'd be furious. I knew they'd paint me as the villain, the brother who wouldn't give Julian a chance. But I also knew it wasn't my job to fix everything anymore. I was done. That night, I went to bed and slept better than I had in years. A few days later, I woke up to a knock at my door. It was early, too early for a social visit. My stomach tightened as I walked to the door, a feeling of dread creeping up my spine. When I opened it, I saw them, my parents, standing side by side on the steps outside my apartment building. My father's face was pinched with anger, my mother's eyes already brimming with tears. "Marcus," my father said, his voice low and controlled. "We need to talk." I stepped back but didn't invite them in. "About what?" "About your brother." My mother jumped in, her voice trembling. "You can't just shut him out like this. You're tearing this family apart." I crossed my arms, feeling the icy calm settle over me. "I'm not shutting him out. I'm enforcing the standards I've always held for everyone in my company. Julian didn't meet them." My father's eyes flashed. "Don't play semantics with us. This isn't about your firm. It's about family." I shook my head. "No, it's exactly about my firm. About fairness. If I hired Julian just because he's your son, What would that say to everyone else who works their ass off every day? I won't do that. My mother stepped forward, reaching for my arm. Marcus, you have to understand how hard this has been on him. He's humiliated. You need to do the right thing and offer him the job. I pulled my arm away, my jaw tight. The right thing? You mean, lie to my team and compromise everything I built just to make Julian feel better? You're being unreasonable, my father snapped. You think you're better than us? Better than your own brother? I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling. This isn't about being better. It's about being fair. My father's expression hardened. If you won't help him, we'll have no choice but to tell people what you're really like. How you're cold, how you're selfish, how you turned your back on your family. A threat. That's what it was, plain and simple. My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice level. Is that supposed to scare me? Because it doesn't. My mother's lip quivered. We're your parents, Marcus. We're trying to help you see reason. No, I said firmly. You're trying to guilt me into doing what you want. But that's not going to work anymore. My father took a step forward, his voice low and menacing. We can make things very difficult for you if you force us to. Don't forget that. I held his gaze for a long moment, my pulse racing. Then I pulled out my phone and calmly dialed the non-emergency police number. What are you doing? My mother gasped. I'm calling the police, I said flatly. You're trespassing and threatening me. Leave before they get here. For a second, they both just stared at me, shocked. Then my father's face darkened with rage. This is how you treat your family? I didn't flinch. This is how I protect myself. I stood there, phone still in my hand, as they finally turned and walked away, my father's shoulders rigid, my mother's sobs echoing down the hall. When they were gone, I closed the door and locked it. My hands were still shaking, but in the quiet that followed, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Resolve. I wasn't going to let them bully me anymore. Not in my home. Not in my life. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, the calm and neutral space somehow making everything feel more real. My lawyer, a woman named Denise with a cool, measured voice, listened carefully as I told her what had happened. The threats, the emotional blackmail, the way my parents showed up at my door like I was a child they could still control. When I finished, she nodded and leaned back in her chair. Marcus, you have every right to protect yourself. You don't owe them anything. I exhaled slowly, feeling the truth of her words settle into me. What can I do? She picked up a pen and tapped it lightly against her notepad. Given their behavior, the threats, the repeated harassment, I'd recommend filing a restraining order. It sends a clear message that this is no longer about family disagreements. It's about your personal safety and well-being. A part of me hesitated, the old instinct still there to keep the peace, to avoid making things worse. But then I thought about my father's face when he said they'd make things difficult for me, about the cold certainty in his eyes, the way he saw me not as a son, but as an obstacle to be controlled. I want to do it, I said quietly. I want it to be over. Denise nodded. I'll start the paperwork today. We'll include the texts, the voicemails, everything you showed me. This will protect you legally and personally. That afternoon, I walked out of her office feeling like I had crossed an invisible line. Not in a bad way, in a final, freeing way. I had always believed that family meant you forgave and forgot, no matter how deep the hurt. But now, I saw it differently. Family didn't mean I had to accept being treated like a pawn in their games. A couple weeks later, I stood before a judge, my hands steady as I handed over the documentation Denise had put together. The threats, the demands, the manipulative messages. My parents didn't even bother to show up in person. I think some part of them still believed I'd back down. The judge's ruling was clear and direct. They were not allowed to contact me, not allowed to show up at my home or my office. Legally, I was done with them. When I walked out of the courthouse, the sky was a bright, endless blue. I felt like I could breathe in a way I hadn't in years. No more guilt. No more phone calls. No more pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. Not because someone else gave me that safety, but because I claimed it for myself. Spring had come to Denver, and with it a sense of quiet possibility. I woke up one morning to the sun streaming through my window, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like there was a weight pressing down on my chest. No missed calls, no guilt-tripping texts, no more demands dressed up as family obligations. At the office, things were moving fast. We'd just secured a new project in Santa Fe, a chance to bring some of my favorite designs to life in a city that had always felt a little bit like home. I decided to turn it into more than just another job. I launched a mentorship program for aspiring architects from underprivileged backgrounds, something I'd always wished I'd had when I was starting out. It wasn't just about giving back. It was about creating a space where no one ever had to feel like they didn't belong because they didn't come from the right family. The kids I worked with were hungry to learn, eager to build something that would last. And in helping them, I felt like I was building something for myself too. a future that had nothing to do with my parents' approval. Naomi was a big part of that future. We've been dating for a few months now, and every day she showed me what it meant to be with someone who didn't care about the masks I used to wear around my family. She was an urban planner, smart, funny, with a way of seeing the world that challenged me in all the best ways. She never once tried to make me feel small, never once asked me to prove myself. One evening, as we walked by the river downtown, Naomi looked at me and said, "You're not what your family tried to make you. You're so much more than that." I don't think I'd ever really believed that until she said it out loud. Sitting in my apartment a few days later, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I set up my phone on a little tripod and hit record. I didn't do it for likes or shares. I did it for me. I talked about everything. How I'd spent years trying to buy love with money and obedience. How I'd let my family's expectations shape every decision I made. How it took them rejecting me to realize that I'd been rejecting myself for years. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I just spoke the truth. And when I finished, I saved the video and tucked it away in a folder. Maybe one day I'd share it. Maybe I wouldn't. It didn't matter. Just saying it out loud felt like shedding a skin I didn't even realize I'd outgrown. Later that night, Naomi and I sat on my balcony, a blanket around our shoulders and a bottle of wine between us. We talked about the future, about Santa Fe, about what it meant to build a life that was mine, not one that I had to justify to anyone. As the stars blinked to life above us, I realized that for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone. Not to Julian. Not to my parents. Not even to the world. I was done chasing acceptance from people who had never really seen me. I was done trying to earn love that was always conditional. In the quiet of that night, with Naomi's hand in mine, I felt like I was finally starting a new chapter, one where I got to decide what my life would look like. And I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning.